The airport was alive with the usual chaos, people rushing past, announcements echoing overhead, and the rhythmic clatter of rolling suitcases on tile floors. The air was thick with anticipation as travelers moved in every direction, their faces a mix of excitement, impatience, and distraction. In the middle of it all, Gate 24 was packed with travelers waiting to board a flight to Dallas. Among them was a woman in her late 40s, impeccably dressed in a navy blazer and heels that clicked sharply as she moved. Her posture was perfect, her movements deliberate and measured. She carried herself with an air of quiet superiority, scanning the first-class line as though assessing who belonged there and who didn't. Her eyes quickly fixed on a young man standing confidently in the line, his casual attire a stark contrast to her polished appearance. No older than 16, he wore jeans, a hoodie, and a bright red hat that seemed to shine in the fluorescent lighting above. MAGA was embroidered on the cap in bold capital letters, and it seemed to ignite something within her. She glanced at him again, her jaw tightening as she muttered under her breath, "Unbelievable." She couldn't shake the thought. Who did he think he was, wearing that hat in first class? Her thoughts ran wild. Was he even old enough to afford that ticket? Did he think the hat would give him some kind of free pass? The boarding announcement crackled over the speakers, and the young man began to move forward, his ticket in hand. But as he approached the gate, the woman stepped closer. Her heels clicked loudly on the floor, a sharp sound that echoed in the terminal. She wasn't about to let her thoughts slide without saying something. Before the line started moving, her reaction sparked a scene that no one at Gate 24 would soon forget. She wasn't shy about voicing her opinion. As the young man stepped toward the gate agent, she angled herself in front of him, blocking his path. Her polished demeanor was now tinged with irritation. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I think you might be in the wrong line." The young man blinked, momentarily confused. He looked around, then back at her. "No, this is first class," he replied simply, holding up his boarding pass. Her eyes narrowed as she took in the bold red hat perched on his head. "First class?" she repeated with a skeptical laugh. "You're telling me you bought a first-class ticket?" Her voice was loud now, and the people in the line started to take notice. The young man stayed calm, though there was a slight crease in his brow. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his tone polite but firm. "Is there a problem?" The woman crossed her arms, her voice sharp now. "I don't know who you think you are, but first class is for people who, well, let's just say it's for people who belong there." She gestured toward his hat, and her voice carried as she continued. "I'm not sure someone with that attitude belongs here." The young man tilted his head, his lips pressing into a thin line. He didn't say anything at first, but the silence only seemed to embolden her. "You know," she continued, her voice rising slightly, "there are plenty of seats back in economy where you'd probably feel more comfortable." By now, more heads had turned, murmurs rippling through the crowd. The gate agent glanced up from her screen, her expression shifting to one of concern. But instead of shrinking away, the young man squared his shoulders. He wasn't going to let this slide, but he wasn't going to engage in the same hostile energy she had brought either. He drew a slow breath, his calm composure unwavering. Looking the woman directly in the eye, his voice steady, he said, "Ma'am, I'm just here to board my flight like everyone else. My ticket's valid, and I don't think it's anyone's business where I sit." His words were simple, yet resolute, and they seemed to fuel her indignation even more. She let out a scoff and turned to the people around them, seeking validation. "Can you believe this?" she said, gesturing toward him. "First class used to mean something. Now apparently anyone can—" "That's enough," interrupted a voice from the gate. The gate agent, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, had stepped out from behind her desk. She crossed her arms, her gaze sharp, her voice cutting through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" The woman turned toward her, her tone switching to faux innocence. "I'm just saying, I think it's a little suspicious that someone like him," she paused, glancing at the young man again, "is in this line. I mean, look at him." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, some people shaking their heads, others whispering to one another. The gate agent raised a hand to quiet the crowd. "Let me see your boarding pass, sir," she said to the young man. He handed it over without hesitation. The gate agent scanned it, glanced at her screen, and nodded. Mr. Barron Trump, first class. Everything checks out. A wave of silence washed over the onlookers. The name hung in the air like an unspoken truth. All eyes snapped back to the young man, who stood there unfazed as if he'd been through this kind of scrutiny before. The woman blinked, her mouth opening and closing as though searching for words. Wait, you're... Yes, ma'am, Barron said with a small nod. That's my name. The crowd's murmurs turned to hushed exclamations, and the woman's face flushed a deep red. Some pulled out their phones, some quickly Googling his name. The tension in the air had shifted, but the woman's indignation hadn't entirely melted away. But the moment wasn't over yet. Barron's next words would change everything. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words were calm, deliberate, and carried a weight that made everyone lean in just a little closer. You know, he began, looking directly at the woman, my dad always told me to treat people with respect, even when they don't show it back, because how you act says more about you than it does about anyone else. The woman's face flushed deeper. She opened her mouth to respond, but Barron wasn't finished. You judged me without knowing anything about me. All you saw was a hat. But here's the thing. That hat doesn't define me. Just like your words today don't have to define you. The crowd was riveted. Conversation stopped. Even the gate agent froze mid-step, her hands still hovering near the boarding scanner. Barron took a small step forward, his voice softening but still carrying across the space. I didn't choose to be in the position I'm in, but I do get to choose how I act. And right now, I'm choosing not to argue with you, because there's enough fighting in the world, don't you think? The woman stood there stunned. It was clear she hadn't expected this, hadn't expected to be addressed with such grace and dignity by someone she tried to humiliate. The onlookers, too, were taken aback, and their opinions were beginning to shift. I hope your day gets better, Barron added, his tone sincere, and I hope you'll think twice before you make someone else feel small. There was a collective exhale from the crowd. A few people clapped softly. The man in the business suit gave a low whistle. Someone muttered, well, that was something, and others nodded in agreement. But as Barron moved forward to board the plane, the ripple effect of his words was just beginning. The woman stood frozen. Her earlier confidence had evaporated. She looked around hoping for support, but the faces surrounding her told a different story. Some were sympathetic, others disappointed, and a few openly critical. You know, you really owe him an apology, said the young mother holding her toddler, her voice calm but firm. The woman's gaze dropped, her mouth twitching as if she wanted to respond, but no words came. Barron had already disappeared down the jet bridge, his red hat still visible as he walked away, a small beacon in the sea of onlookers. He handed it over without hesitation. The gate agent scanned it, glanced at her screen, and nodded.